Story of Snow White and Rose Red. It was a long time ago when there were still dwarves living in forest. On the edge of the forest, in a little cottage, lived a widowed lady with two lovely daughters, Snow White and Rose Red. Now, outside the cottage were two rose bushes. One grew white roses and one grew red roses. And it was one of the things that the girls liked to do was in the mornings was to pick a rose from each bush so that their mother woke up to a freshly cut white rose and a freshly cut red rose every morning. One autumn evening, as the three women were spinning by the fire, they heard a knock at the door, and expecting that it was a stranger, in old languages the word guest translates as stranger, claiming his right of hospitality, they opened the door. But it wasn't a person standing there, but a bear. So they were a little bit worried, but they let the bear come into the house. And to their surprise, he began to speak to them and said, "I am so cold, let me warm myself by your fire." So the bear lay down by the hearth, and it transpired that the bear was really quite good company, for he came back every night that winter and lay by the hearth, and the girls would play with him. So when the springtime came and it was time for him to go, they were very sad, but hoped that they would see him again soon. It came one day when Rose Red and Snow White went into the forest, perhaps to gather firewood, perhaps to gather something else, and they heard such a hullabaloo of a high-pitched voice calling for help. And when they followed the sound, they saw a dwarf with a great long white beard that came down to his knees, that was trapped in a log. He had an axe by his side, which he had used to cut the log with, and in the split that he made with his axe, his beard had become wedged, and he couldn't pull it out. So Rose Red and Snow White did their best. They pulled and pulled and pulled, but the log had such a firm grip on the dwarf's beard that they couldn't release it. So Rose Red pulled some scissors out of her pocket and cut off the end of the dwarf's beard. And he stamped his feet, and he shouted at them, and he said, "Look what you've done to my beautiful, lovely white beard. It's terrible, terrible, and I thought you were going to help me." And with that, the little man picked up a bag of gold that he'd hidden under the log and simply stomped off without a word of thanks. So the two sisters went back to their mother and told her the story that evening as they sat spinning by the fire. Days turned into weeks, and again the two sisters found themselves in the forest. And there they were, by the river, planning to go fishing to catch some fish for supper. And there was the same little dwarf. His beard was caught in the fishing line, and where he had been fishing, I think he must have caught a pike, because the fish was very strong and very fierce and was pulling him by his trapped beard towards the river, and it looked as if the fish would pull him under and he would drown. So the two girls went over and helped him as he shouted and shouted, and they tried to pull his beard free from the tangled fishing line. But again Rose Red pulled her scissors out of her pocket and cut off another piece of his beard. And the dwarf shouted at them, "Look what you've done to my beautiful white beard. My beautiful, lovely white beard. Going to be ages growing back." And he picked up a bag of pearls that he'd hidden behind a rock and stomped off. Sometime later, Snow White and Rose Red travelled to the city to buy the kind of things that they couldn't get from the forest, like sewing needles and threads, those sort of essentials. And to get there, they had to cross a heath. And on the way back, they crossed the heath again. They heard a probably now familiar cry from the ungrateful dwarf. And there they saw an eagle had grabbed the dwarf in its talons and was just flying off. So Rose Red grabbed one boot and Snow White grabbed the other boot, and they pulled and they pulled and they pulled until they brought the dwarf back down to earth. The eagle flew off, leaving the dwarf and Snow White and Rose Red on the heath. And the dwarf was incandescent with rage. "You almost pulled my thighs out of my hip joints. You were so rough. Could you not have done something better than that?" And at that moment, a bear appeared across the heath. And at first, Snow White and Rose Red didn't recognise him. But then, the bear swiped the dwarf, and he didn't get up. And then the bear looked at Snow White and looked at Rose Red, and they realised, of course, it was their friend from the winter. And then he took off his bear skin, and from inside the fur out stepped the most handsome man they had ever seen. And he said, "I'm really a prince. I have been under the spell of that wicked dwarf. But now that he has died, I can be released and I can shapeshift back into my human form." So, of course, one of the sisters married the prince. And of course, one of the others, because the other sister married one of his brothers. And when they left their little cottage, they took their mother with them, and they took both the red rose bush and the white rose bush. And so they all lived happily ever after on all the wealth that they had gained from the wicked dwarf. Lots of stories about people shapeshifting into wolves, into bears. Of course, Tolkien uses this. Quite a strange one. I kind of wonder how old the roots of that story really are. Certainly, in a lot of the Norse tradition, dwarves are kind of slippery characters and really not to be trusted. There we are. But I like that story. That's a nice one. There's something quite old about red roses and white roses. In the tarot card of the magician, there are both red roses and white roses, and there is, in the alchemical tradition, there is something. It's kind of perfect balance. There we are. Not all the Brothers Grimm stories are Grimm, and that's a nice one. So, I hope to see you again soon.